much. Now, just let me introduce Paul by saying that many of us in this period of the last month or so have given pretty deep thought to what our businesses are all about. What is it that we do? Where do we add value? What are the things that are extraneous to our business? Well, Paul Barrett, who's the CEO and founder of AZNGA, has been thinking about those thoughts about advice for 5 or 6 years. Paul been an investor in now, I think, over 60 advice practices, and has probably thought more deeply about how value is created in advice and what the future of advice is than almost anybody else in the country. So it's a real pleasure for me to be able to introduce Paul to speak to us today about professionalisation and what it means for advice businesses. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Toby. I can tell you that as far as deep thinking goes, my thinking this morning has been on how to put up a Jayco caravan. Haven't our lives changed? You know, I've got a group of children out there right now enjoying the Jayco, and that was the first 2 hours of my day this morning, and now here we are. So there's a lot of variety in one's day at the moment, that's for sure. Firstly, best wishes I'd like to send out to everybody on the call today in terms of surviving isolation and staying safe. So I know it's been a big challenge for a lot of people, and I actually have two business interests. One being the financial services and AZNGA, the other actually being Four Pines Brewing Company. And I can tell you, comparing and contrasting the challenges facing both of those types of businesses, it's quite a different set of challenges. I remember listening on the Sunday night when Scott Morrison effectively shut pubs and hospitality venues, and the war room and the crisis management that ensued in the Four Pines business. It was full on. It was really detailed crisis planning, hour by hour over the first couple of days, and then day by day, and now it's week by week. But I can tell you that the innovation, the speed of the response required, the intensity, was full on. And then you contrast that to the financial advisory and accounting businesses that we invested in. And really, for those firms, we had to take a big, deep breath, sit back and really deeply think about what this all meant, because it wasn't actually that obvious. And so in the end, most of our questions centered around, well, who are our clients? Because they were the ones being impacted. And we had to understand how they were being impacted and then respond accordingly. And so that's what we've been doing. I feel like in the advisory and accounting businesses, we've had more space and time to be able to reflect and to do those things. Whereas in the hospitality-oriented Four Pines business, it's been full on and we've had to act very quickly. So interesting contrast. And in terms of the timing of today's session, I'm actually in the middle of our board cycle. So we've invested in 65 SME businesses, around 30 what I would describe as hubs, and another 35 smaller businesses that have tucked in. And we're doing the boards at the moment. So we've done 14 last week. We've got another 16 to do this week. And I've been blown away. I mean, the level of preparation that these SME businesses have been doing, not just obviously for COVID, which is a here and now thing, but for the upcoming impacts of the Hayne Royal Commission. It's been amazing. I'll just give you a set of numbers. So the first 14 or 13, it might be board meetings. These numbers are the actual EBIT numbers versus budget for the first quarter of the year. And this is in percentage terms. So 218, 121, 93, 181, 111, 108, 298, 117, 77, 227, 94, and 76. That's a hell of a set of numbers. And whilst that won't reflect any impact of COVID, because the first quarter of this year, it shows you that the businesses are in good shape and doing a good job. The outlook from all of the principals of the businesses last week was very positive with respect to COVID, very, very positive. The accounting firms had a slightly more negative outlook than the financial planning firms, and that's because, of course, they've got an accounts receivable issue. They've got to bill clients and get paid, and they are worried about the level of bad debts that they might encounter in the medium term. So that would be one difference and call out to make. But generally, the optimism was great, and there's a real sense that people are looking forward to the spring, whenever that is, and whatever that is. But this notion that restaurants will once again be busy and lively, and that the kitchens will be smelling of the fine treats that have been cooked inside, and that the shopping centres will be packed again. People are thinking about that, and that's how they're sort of getting through this and focusing on the future. So, yeah, it's been an interesting few weeks, but I can tell you personally, notwithstanding having to put up tents and camper trailers, the productivity levels and being able to do video meetings, it's been incredible. No longer do I have to get on a 7 o'clock flight to go and do 3 meetings and come back that day to another city. I can do 7 or 8 meetings in half the time, and the productivity. And in fact, the lack of lag between meeting 1, meeting 2, and meeting 3 has been notable. So I'm quite enjoying it. Now, to today's topic, 270 sleeps till the future. Well, when I first wrote this presentation, it was 270. It's a few less than that now. But this notion of 270 sleeps to the future really is a way of helping the human beings who are running the SME companies that we invest in understand that the change that's going on has an end. Okay, our view is that 1 January 2021 is the future. And for most financial planners and accounting business owners, they've been preparing for this for some time. For some people, it's already the future. Some people have already prepared and have renovated their businesses. So for some, it's been the future for ages. For some, unfortunately, there is no future. There are a large number of people opting out, whether it be because of the FASIA rules or other reasons. But for a number of firms, the future starts on the 1st of January 2021, because that's really when the impact of the post-Hayne Royal Commission changes will be felt by most people. So which category you fit into in terms of how prepared you are for the future really depends on your vision and whether you can execute it and whether or not that vision's any good. So we like to think of that as your capability and your capacity. And I'll talk more about that a little later. But humans like structure. They like a deadline. So we're telling our 70-odd firms that we've invested in, the future starts on 1 January next year. We're counting down. We're getting ready. It's also a nice way to flag to your major investor, for us, the Azimut Group, that the lead up to that's going to be a bit challenging, and they're not going to get the same results they might have got in a different period. But before we get into the future, there's one key element I want to talk about. It's a key ingredient that is required to ensure that we survive and prosper, and that's leadership. And it's a funny old thing, leadership. I used to think that if someone could give a rousing speech, excite the mind and reveal a bright future, that they were a great leader. And I remember in my corporate life, sitting in many a town hall, being inspired by leaders with very, very big titles, often flash suits and sometimes quite fancy accents. And if I'm honest, on reflection, I became one of them. But for the less fancy accent, I still consider the Kiwi accent the Queen's English. But I love that feeling of standing on a stage and giving that rousing speech and getting the applause. It was a bit of a drug. The problem was I never really had the capability or the capacity, even in those big firms that I worked for, to deliver that dream. There were too many people with similar titles, but with completely different priorities. Too much greed and self-interest. And as my mate Jake the Muss would say, too much weight's not enough speed work. And there were massive breaks in the chain of command where the goals weren't aligned. So the goals of the senior CEOs were not aligned to the middle management and frontline people, and certainly the clients, and alignment would get broken down. And of course, there was also a fair amount of incompetence as well. Big organizations, there's lots of places to hide. Now, I've since learnt that leadership is something entirely different. You've got to know who you are, and you've got to know what your values are to be an effective leader. You've got to know exactly what it is you're good at and who you're trying to help. You've got to know what problems they have and how you are going to help them solve those problems. Now, you do need to communicate well. It helps to be inspiring, but you can't bullshit people. Leadership is about telling the truth, more so now than ever before. So when I'm asked to talk about the future, I'm not going to be flowery about it. I'm just going to tell the truth. Some of it might be uncomfortable, but I'm going to tell you, my truth, I suppose. Starting to sound like a contestant on Married at First Sight with my truth. I missed that show. 6 months into AZNGA's journey, I remember vividly bringing together the principals of the 5 firms that we'd invested in back then. We're at the quarantine station at Manly, and I had to give a talk on our strategy and our vision. And it was really uncomfortable for me because it was early on, and to be honest, I didn't really know exactly where we were going. But I told the truth. I actually told those people in the room that day that I didn't know for sure exactly where we were going. Now, I could see in their faces that they were a little disappointed. But over time, they have learnt they can trust me because I told the truth. And I think that's far more important. So strategy and vision and leadership of any size of business, it's akin to getting in a boat down at Manly Beach, say, and heading towards North America. Now, you can say we're heading to North America, and you'll get the question, well, where in North America? Now, the answer more often than not is, I'm not exactly sure. It'll depend on the tides, it'll depend on the currents, the weather, and other inputs we get along the way. And if there's one thing I've learned about strategy worth passing on, it's this. If the boat is heading north and the currents and winds are heading north, you can run as fast as you want in a southerly direction along the deck of that boat. You're going to go north. Okay, you'll be exhausted. You'll be north. You've got to read the conditions. And the question for us is, which way are the currents heading? Now, as the currents and weather patterns reveal themselves, as we get closer to North America, we can tack, we can react, we can fine-tune our course and be agile. But it's not until we make visual connection with the coastline we can work out our precise landing point. So as a leader, don't feel pressured into knowing all the answers. Sometimes you just don't know yet. And the other one too that I've learned, particularly lately, is not to fall for conventional wisdom. I keep getting asked, how can we work together as an industry to change the perception of our sector? And people think that having talk fests and lobby groups are the way that we can get there. And I just don't think that's ever been effective before. I think the way to get there is for each individual party to take it upon themselves to behave like a fiduciary. If we all do that, we'll get there. There's no other way. And I think about right now, there are a number of really smart entrepreneurs with fiduciary mindsets, all trying to take advantage of our industry disruption and delivering awesome, innovative new products and services to consumers. There's a real emergence of a new group of leaders and innovators in our sector. And interestingly, it's not being led by bankers. Okay, the way to bring about change is to come into work every day and contribute to building something really clever and client-centric. It's the only way. The other thing I was asked a few times recently was, how can we win back the Australian public? And the truth is, I don't think we've ever had them. Only a fraction of the Australian public have an advisor. I know hundreds of people who don't have an advisor. And naturally enough, your clients will tell you they love you, but they're not the issue. It's the unadvised public, they're the issue. So I reckon it's going to take a lot longer, up to a decade maybe, for the industry as a whole to shake off the tag of, the Royal Commission and the fallout from that, the commission salesperson, etc. Now, many firms have already evolved into focused professional experts in their field. They're behaving like the firm of the future today. Those firms don't have to wait a decade to be seen as an A-grader, but it is going to be a collective effort to change Australia's public perception overall of our sector. Now, it is okay to have, and it's possible to have, a fiduciary business with a profit motive. These things can go together and should go together. Interestingly, I've been working with a lot of the up-and-coming future leaders of our firms in recent months. These are late 20, early 30-year-olds, mid 30-year-olds. And they're all obsessed with the barefoot investor, and the problems with their bosses, with their old ways. They overcomplicate business with the latest learnings of philosophers and the zealots that they've read about. And I have to refocus them. One of the key conversations we have is, it is possible to have a profit motive and a fiduciary business. And I've developed a simple model on how to think about this. And it's essentially the model that I use to build AZNGA. And it kind of goes like this. You've got to ask yourself simple questions and obsess about the answer to these simple questions before you go and build a profitable, sustainable fiduciary business. And these are the questions that I asked in coming up with the AZNGA business, and the question that I encourage all of our SME businesses to think about. The first one is, what am I good at? And don't be flippant about the answer to this. Really obsess about it. So when I left ANZ, I had a year sitting around a dining room table thinking about these questions. What am I good at? And be truthful, because sometimes there's something you want to say to that question, but be honest. And if the answer is not much, that's okay too. Because the second part of that question is, if I'm not good at that much, or I'm just good at relationships or whatever it might be, what could I be good at, given the resources I've got access to? And again, really think deeply about the answers to these seemingly simple questions. The next question is, who do I know? I vividly remember my dining room table being covered in paper, and I had vivid markers. And I had cohorts of people that I knew, financial planners, accountants, executives, my friends, family, a whole bunch of cohorts, if you like, and a lot of detail. This took weeks, not hours. I mean, this whole process probably took six weeks. And then once you've got those cohorts, ask yourself, what problems do they have? And work out the key problems these cohorts of people are trying to solve. And then work out which are the hardest ones for them to solve. The final question is, can I solve them? And this comes to your capacity and capability. And if you go through that exercise and you go through that, as simple as it seems, you'll be amazed what appears in front of you. For me, the AZNJ business model appeared when I went through that exercise, because in terms of who do I know, I had financial planners and various other cohorts. And one of the groups I had was Mothers Group on that page. And of course, I met my business partner, Paul Barrett, through Mothers Group. And in the end, the problems that I decided to try and solve were succession and growth, which is how the AZNGA business came to be. So that's just a simple model that I think everyone should be thinking about, and it's a great way to walk away from the complexity of the business you know today and start a fresh lot of thinking. So what does the future look like for financial services SME businesses? Well, in a nutshell, like a professional services firm, more qualified staff, an organizational structure, pathways to partnership, transparent fees, episodic advice as well as ongoing advice, and a lot larger. The days of sort of $1 to $2 million revenue businesses, I think, are numbered. Most of the firms that, our average firm now is around 3.8 million of revenue, but that is heading up quickly. And we think 5 million really in terms of revenue is going to be a ticket to the game, given the increase in costs and complexity and the need to charge differently in the future. So I think there's going to be fewer but larger SME businesses. Top lines of 5 million. I think generalists are going to struggle. Firms will have to develop one or many deep and narrow areas of expertise and offer as many of these to their clients as they can. So that doesn't mean you can't be a generalist. It means, though, that the things you're doing, you need to be very, very specialized at. So having a holistic financial planning offer that is just, a suite of today's sort of retail services is going to get harder and harder to do. And I often use the GP sort of specialist model to show this. I mean, there's an increasing number of specialists in Australia. And of course, people pay more for specialist advice because they perceive, rightly or wrongly, they perceive more value when they're talking to a specialist. So generalist firms are likely to become multidisciplinary. We can deliver a one-stop shop, albeit across divisions. 100% of the revenue will be from advisory activities. There'll be no more product subsidization. 30% EBIT margins will be possible. And we're seeing that in our portfolios over time. EBIT margins for firms that are specializing are actually going up across our portfolio. It does mean higher charge-out rates. And to justify higher charge-out rates, firms have to possess deep expertise that they can give evidence that they possess. And again, it's why multidisciplinary or specialization is the most viable strategy in our view. The idea we have today about ongoing service is likely to undergo change. I wrote an article a couple of months ago that actually attracted quite a bit of heat about this topic, but I think the COVID-19 situation is a great example of what I'm talking about. If you can appear in front of your client at the right moment when they've got a need and you can solve that problem, they're going to value that more. And I'm not saying you can't enter ongoing service arrangement. I'm saying you need to be able to use data and relationship and knowledge of the client to appear Johnny on the spot when your client has a real need. And I think that subscription model that we've been brought up on is going to come under more and more pressure. I'm not saying it's going to end overnight. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying we need to be clever about protecting ourselves and getting better client relationships using data and anticipating when they will have needs. Some of our specialist firms, doctors and pharmacy-oriented firms, are particularly good at this because they know when their client's going to need a mortgage or when they're going to need insurance or when they're going to need a business loan. They've mapped out the life cycle of a pharmacist or of a doctor or of a teacher. And so they can appear in and around the right time. I'd like to briefly touch on the concept of capability and capacity, because I think these two things can help you in building and simplifying your SME business. When we first started AZNGA, when we looked at firms, we did the usual things. We looked at their P&Ls, their balance sheets, their client books, their staff processes, culture. And we did all the usual DD and we assessed firms on those things and made investment decisions accordingly. And that approach has changed a little bit. We still do those things, but those things are now layer one. What we're really looking at is what's the capability that we are acquiring or investing in? What's the underlying expertise or skill? Because it's our view that if we can invest in capability, we can then make that capability available to other firms in our community to enable them to become the deeper and narrower multidisciplinary firms. And so we're looking at those things I was talking about before. So for example, JPH in Victoria, our latest investment, who just focus in on pharmacy advice, or McKinley Plowman in Perth, who have a capability around due diligence, which we now use for all of our work internally, and we are taking that to the external market. So capability is what you're good at. It's your expertise. The second thing we look at, and this is where we try and help our firms, is capacity. So how many times can you take that capability to how many people and how you're going to do it? And it comes down to how you organize your ecosystem. And this is where we're learning a lot. And we're trying to simplify the way SME businesses look and are structured to deliver more of what they're good at. So let me give you a little, a simple model in terms of thinking about this. Some of this appears to be boring, but it's critically important. So in our minds, we have a common spine for the ecosystem of an SME business. And at the very base of that is the accounting system, the general ledger. This stuff's really important because if you build that right, the reporting and insight you get later and the ability to be Johnny on the spot for your client is incredible. So general ledger and accounting system at the baseline. The next thing is a data warehouse. All SME businesses should own their own data or use some smart third parties to help you at least get your data in one place. So we've built our own data warehouse that you can then report all sorts of things on. The next layer is your licensing layer and quality assurance layer. And I've learned more about quality assurance in my role as chairman of Four Pines Brewing Company than I have in my time in financial services, because when you're putting liquid in a bottle that a consumer has to drink, the quality assurance element is critically important. So you've got your general ledger and accounting system, your data warehouse and reporting. The next is your licensing and quality assurance layer. The next is your administration and manufacturing department. Which parts of administration are you going to insource? Which parts are you going to outsource? Which parts do you own? Which parts do you not own? Then we've got our IT layer, our product system layer, and finally our client management and engagement layer. So there are 7 layers to every SME business that we've invested in. And for the most part, they've got these bespoke standalone systems that don't talk to each other, that might have been brought in through dealer group relationships or other third-party supply all over the place. and new staff come in and they use these systems differently. What we're trying to do with our investments and the businesses we've invested in is firstly identify those 7 systems, get some degree of consistency, and then simplify the way they are used and make it consistent from staff member to staff member. So we've got capability, what we're good at, and then capacity, how we're going to take that to the marketplace. Now, and I'm going quite quickly through a large number of topics. I am condensing our hour-long presentation to a half-hour session. So I'm going to keep going and finish up on growth, and then we can do some Q&A. So I'm now going to just turn my attention to growth. For SME businesses, financial planning, accounting firms, there appear to be 2 main types of growth. The first is organic. The second is M&A. Firstly, and quickly on organic. I used to think organic growth was the best type of growth. I think I still think that. Organic growth, if you've got great capability, is actually much easier to deliver than if you don't. If you've got a mixed capability, you're not quite sure of your value proposition, or it's general and a bit bland, then it's hard. But if you've got a crystal clear, very, very sharp value proposition that everyone understands. For example, we have a business in North Sydney that just does pension transfers for UK expats. That's all they do. If you understand that's your capability, getting organic growth is easier because everything is anchored on that. Your operational systems are anchored around that. You only have one set of processes. Your marketing, your employment approach, everything's anchored around that. Organic growth just happens in those businesses. It's almost like they don't have to try to get it. There are other firms who do organic growth by buying it, and smart marketing campaigns, hiring expensive resources, etc. And I've got one firm I'm talking to at the moment with a view to hopefully investing in them. And you can just see, looking at their P&L going back years, that they've got awesome organic growth. They've gone from 0 to 22 million of revenue, all organically. But their profit margins are really low because they've used their P&L to get it. Whereas M&A uses the balance sheet to get it. It uses debt or capital to get growth. So switching to M&A, this might seem like a crazy thing for someone who runs an M&A company to say, but most M&A fails. Most M&A generates win-lose outcomes. There's a winner and a loser in that transaction. You've got to find a way in M&A to have win-win outcomes. And that means the vendor and the acquirer both winning. And you've got to be able to, through an M&A program or a transaction, prove that that's what you're trying to do. So just a few quick tips on M&A. And if you'd like some detail on this, download our white paper. It's on our website, where we've put all of the M&A learnings we've had over the last 6 years into one document. It's a really practical document. Just jump on the website and download it. It goes through a whole bunch of these things in detail. But a few quick things. Firstly, what sort of investor are you? Are you value or growth? If you're value, you're looking for cheaply priced assets. And if you're looking for cheaply priced assets, you've got to know that once you've acquired that asset, you've got a program to renovate it because it's cheap for a reason. The second type of investor you can be is a growth investor. And AZNGA is a growth investor. Many of our firms are not. Many of our firms are value investors. But as a growth investor, you are happy to pay a premium for something because you know that you can take that capability and execute it more to get even more growth. And so you've got to work out what type of investor you are to start with. Then you've got to be cashed up, whether that means through debt or equity or both. You've got to be cashed up. It smells. There is a smell to someone in a transactional situation who's cashed up. The vendors can smell it. It's not just about the valuation. It's about, can you execute on that valuation? Vendors are getting clever at knowing whether or not you're good for it. It's an M&A pheromone. Don't be at the top of the bid. If you've got cash and it smells, hang back with confidence. Hang back with confidence and let often the top of the bid win the initial stage and fall over when the bank doesn't fund the bid. And I can't tell you the number of times our firms have successfully made acquisitions with not the top offer because they've sat back in the bid, but they've deliberately used the pheromone. Avoid the small business valuation trap. Small businesses, if you're buying on enterprise values and EBIT multiples or impact multiples, small businesses deliberately and skillfully expand their EBIT margins artificially. So be very mindful of that. Value sustainable earnings. Look into client segments and what we call future-ready revenue. We don't really care too much anymore about the existing P&L of a firm. We use that to create what we think their future P&L will look like, and that's how we value firms. We take a view of their sustainable, forward-looking impact. Look at free cash flows. What are the true after acquisition cost returns of doing a deal? And I'm talking about cash returns. How much excess cash will you generate, dividends will you generate by doing that acquisition after you've paid principal and interest? Is the acquisition on strategy? More often than not, the reason why these deals fail is because the acquisition's not on strategy. If you've got a clear strategy and the mothership's in good nick, acquisitions can work. If you don't have those things, more often than not, they will fail. Monitor synergy benefits. If you go into a deal because you think you're going to get cost and revenue benefits, monitor those. Report back on those things on a monthly basis to your board or your management team. Remember that value is often created by the deals you don't do. And we've learned that the hard way. You know, we've done some deals we shouldn't have done. And now we understand the value is created by the ones you don't do. Be patient, do very thorough DD, break that into financial and qualitative and do them separately and do financial first, because if you can't get that piece done and agreed, there's no point wasting time on the qualitative. Make sure your values are aligned. Look for specialist capability. So there's some of the things that we look at. In the end, when you go to your board to recommend a transaction, you need to be able to talk about the culture of the firm you're investing in, its people, its processes, its clients, and its financials, probably in that order. So in summary, a new style of leadership is required going into this post-Hayne, post-COVID era, and that requires truth-telling. Understand which way the currents are going and make sure that your vision is not going against that current, because it can get tiring. Be very clear on your strategy, understand what you're good at, your capability, and how you're going to deliver it, your capacity. With growth, know there are two forms of growth. The best firms we see do both of those. They don't do one or the other, they do both. And most importantly, from January the 1st, 2021, remember, it's the future. We're no longer a means to an end. We're no longer a distribution channel for big institutions. We're going from advisor best interest to client best interest. Bring it on. Now with that, I might just hand over to see if there are any questions.
Paul, there are indeed a couple of questions, which grew out of your observations about the turnover of successful firms. So firstly, what do you think about smaller business with less than $1 million turnover? Will they need to merge?
Well, it depends on their strategy. If their strategy is to stay small and to operate in a particular niche, and that niche might be a suburb or a city, it might be a particular demographic, and the proprietor's ambitions are to run a small firm, there might be family members involved in that firm, that can work. But if your ambition is to be a general provider of financial services to retail mums and dads, and to grow when you can, and to manage the stuff that gets thrown at you, and you're sort of reactive, then I don't think it is sustainable. But it depends on your objectives. Not everyone's objective is to build a large, profitable, growing firm. Sometimes you've got other objectives for doing this stuff. But if your objectives are to be profitable and sustainable for a long, long time, and when we invest in firms, we really take the view that we want to help them sustain for 50 plus years, then I think being small is harder, because when you're small, it doesn't take much in terms of a headwind or an operational issue to blow your P&L up. And you can go from small to zero pretty quickly. Even medium-sized firms can do that. So I think 5 million, I look at the firms of ours who are 5 million plus, they just tend to be more resilient, financially resilient than the small firms.
Well, that leads naturally to the next question, of course, which is, can you provide an example of firms with 5 million plus of revenue and 30% margins, and the sorts of revenue models that they're using?
Yeah, absolutely, I can. And let me give you two examples. And look, I'll name them. I'm sure they won't mind me naming them. They might even be on the line. But think about McKinley Plowman in Perth. Okay, Nigel Plowman was initially an accountant with a small accounting firm in regional WA, and he's now got a large multidisciplinary firm in Joondalup, which is a suburb in Perth. And he has what's the latest number? Over 100 staff off memory. And this business is a big revenue business with a 33% EBIT margin that is growing, and it's multidisciplinary. So he's got a brand and marketing division. He's got a pension transfers division. He's got a wealth management division, an accounting division, a tax division. And he's running those divisions as specialist units with a divisional head on top of each unit. And so they're narrow and deep, but the way that they're taking that offering to their client is through an IT program he's got. And he's able to take to the client this one stop shop approach. And so their margins are actually increasing. Another one is a retail financial planning firm in North Sydney called FHM. And this firm has phenomenally high EBIT ratios, much higher than that. And the way it achieved its EBIT margin with a revenue of significantly high revenue is through simplification. So over the years, every time the latest platform supplier comes knocking with the latest amazing thing or the latest investment program comes, they say no. And they've stuck to their simplicity of their offering, and they've got one simple offering that they understand very well, and they deliver that to their clients, and they deselect clients who doesn't suit, to devastating effect. So it is possible. The trap, here's the one. Here, let me just give you a fact that we learned that kind of goes against what I'm saying, but because we've learned this, we're able to manage it. Up until about 2 years ago, we noticed that firms with salary levels of between 500,000 and 1.7 million were the most profitable. Firms with under 500 were subscale, couldn't really leverage their fixed cost base. Firms above 1.7 of salary bill were getting overly complicated and inefficient. And the firms in the middle were delivering huge profitability compared to firms on the outside. Now, that goes against what I'm saying, because I'm saying that larger firms have got better EBIT margin. Well, that's only because those larger firms that we're investing in, and the ones that we're helping take from medium size, so say 1.7 million of wages, to large, we understand this trap. What happens typically is when you start hiring more people, you create pods and you create demarcation, you create offices off site, you create complexity, and often what happens is we bring people in rather than technology or process to get efficiency or to get more work done. The problem with bringing people in is you bring in Joe or Mary from down the road who come from accounting firm A to accounting firm B, or your firm or financial planning firm. They have built up a way of doing things through their life. They'll use Excel this way, or they'll use Xplan this way. They come in and they keep doing things their way that they've learned from their old job. Before you know it, you've got 10 different ways of doing things in your firm. So the way to avoid that trap, that salary trap and growth trap, is to be clear on the capacity issues, so on how you do things around here, that ecosystem. If you've got clarity there, when Mary or Joe comes in, they are trained on how you do it your way. Sure, they can add good ideas to improve that, but they do it your way. Or you simply use technology rather than people. So there are things you can do to avoid that trap.
Paul, thank you very much. That's been a real pleasure for me again to hear you talk about your view of what a successful advice professional services business will look like. There are a lot of lessons in what you've said. As you observed, you condensed an hour-long presentation into 30 minutes. We will distribute a link to Paul's book, Deal or No Deal, and also to an ethical investing publication, which Australian Ethical sponsored as a piece of private research. So to all of those of you who've joined us today, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for us to bring two outstanding presentations to this format. And we look forward to you joining us tomorrow when we're talking about two really interesting aspects of advice. So Jonathan Hoyle of Stanford Brown and Lisa Fuentes from Alteris will talk with Bianca Di Mello on why our business model will survive. We've heard from Paul today observations on what will be successful practices built across 60 advice businesses. Jonathan and Lisa will talk about their own business models. And then on a completely different note, we'll have Andrew Bradley from Minters, a financial services partner from Minters, talking about the second oldest profession and what they've learned about professionalism, professionalisation, and what it means for advice businesses. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to you joining us tomorrow. Each of these sessions is recorded and will be available as an individual session through the IMAC website. Paul, Leah, Charles, Mary, thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.